Welcome back to the Wingspan Podcast, episode 37. I'm Doug Barak, joined by my co-host Chris Mahala, NetsDaily, and our special guest. He covers the Brooklyn Nets for NetsDaily, hosts Basketball and More, and is also known as the film study guy.
We got Matt Brooks on the podcast. Thank you for taking some time out of your Monday night to join Doug and I. What's up, man? How you doing?
Chilling, hanging out, getting ready. We got training camp starting tomorrow, so this is. I would like to say it's a relaxing night, but I'm I'm working on film stuff. Shocking, I know. Being on brand tonight.
Well, welcome back. Glad to see you this time around instead of just audio. So glad we're moving up in the world.
Yeah, we got
so
the video.
Just want to start off by mentioning that this episode will be highlighting the Nets offseason. So we'll kick it off with today's news. So Alex Schiffer, along with Shams of The Athletic, reported that Eli Okobo, said that wrong. Okobo? I already forgot, and I practiced this before. But the Frenchman has signed with the Nets. So what do we all think?
All right, Matt, you want to go first? Or you want me to take it?
I'll give a couple of short thoughts. So he's 22, which feels weird because like I remember him getting drafted, and I remember being like, oh, this guy's really interesting, and then you just hear about like his craftiness as a pick and roll playmaker and all these little things that you're like, okay, could be something here. He kind of hit a tricky situation where goes to Phoenix. He's a rookie in year one. Year two, they really bring in Ricky Rubio, who kind of shepherds most of the offense. Then you have, of course, Devin Booker as well. And that's pretty much all your playmaking. So I'm not particularly high on him, but I do think he's worth at least a look. Like I've learned with the Nets over, let's even take the last year. Nwaba I wasn't necessarily low on. I just didn't know what to expect. TLC, I was absolutely like, there is no way that TLC is going to be on this roster after like a month. Now I'm like, I'm looking at him like he's a backup, the backup 4 or whatever. I'm way higher on TLC than I ever thought I would be. And, honestly, like depending upon what the Nets do and if they do make moves, if they package a couple of people in a trade or something like that, it's worth a look. You'd like to know if you have somebody, whether this is a training camp deal, an Exhibit 10, or if it's a two-way contract, although I don't know if he'd be eligible for that. Whether or not that's what that deal is, you'd at least like to know what type of a player it is and if you can rely on him.
Exactly. Just to piggyback off exactly what you said, we're on the same page. I'm not too high on him either. I think it was last Thursday, if he wasn't waived by last Thursday, he was guaranteed to make $1.7 million. And at the end of the day, it's one of those guys that Sean Marks has watched. He went over, saw him, as Bob put it out earlier today in France, where I think he scored 21 points and something else. Left-handed shooter and stuff. So I'm not too high on him, but like you said, if he gets an Exhibit 10, whatever the deal that comes out, we'll likely know tomorrow, which will be Tuesday. And after that, it's just worth the look, You can't really – he's like you said, he's young still. It's surprising that he's that young, considering I remember even – like you said, seeing him in the draft, even seeing him on the Suns a couple times and stuff. But like I said, it's worth the look, and it doesn't really hurt that much.
Yeah, it'll be nice to have another southpaw on the team, and TLC already gave his French stamp of approval, so can't go wrong with that.
Look at TLC recruiting. Look at him. What a year he's had.
Very much so.
Exactly.
So before we dive into the rest of the player signings, just want to get your feel about the coaching staff. We've had a lot of additions, a lot of surprising, but Matt, we'll let you have it first.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny you mentioned like some of the coaching staff. I had to remind myself that D'Antoni's on the team like multiple times because I was looking through film for something I'm working on that should come out at some point this week. And I'm watching Houston Rockets offense, and I'm looking at all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, that's a really nice set. Or I'm looking at the little things that the Rockets have done with it. And I was like, oh my God, the guy running this entire show right here is on the Nets bench as an assistant. Like, that's madness. And I just like, there's little moments where I remember, oh yeah, Jacques Vaughn, the guy that I was super high on after the bubble and, tried to, as best I could, break down everything that he did in that setting. That guy's also an assistant on this bench. And then the head coach is Steve Nash. It's just, I mean, look, like say what you want about the roster, but my goodness, that's a lot of smart people on their bench.
I agree with you 100%. Just to piggyback off that too, Emeka Udoka is another good name to keep out there as well.
Yes.
He's obviously an assistant there. He's not lead. Jack Vaughn's lead. And hey, we don't know how much Jack Vaughn's making exactly, but we know he's one of the highest paid assistants in the league. And he deserves that money, let alone, and he should even, obviously, when the head coaching vacancies were out, a lot more teams had a lot of head coaching vacancies. You can imagine that he was a candidate on a lot of boards. And he'll one day be a head coach in this league. But like I said, like you said, with D'Antoni and Udoka, you got Jack Vaughn, and you got a new coach in Steve Nash. That's a great core and a great group to surround a new head coach with that already is one of the most generational basketball talents at the guard position that the game has ever seen. And you just add that together. I think it's a great team, a great type of mentorship you could put around Nash as well. That kind of gets him adjusted. And obviously, as a rookie head coach coming in with a team that has championship expectations, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving as well. Nash he was that guy that could really control the egos. He's known as that was kind of the staple of when he got hired and stuff. But this coaching staff, I think Sean Marks did a very good job surrounding mostly a rookie head coach with Steve Nash, and I think it's going to play out very well.
Yeah, and it's nice to have rookie coach Amar'e Stoudemire, which is really cool.
Oh, good point.
So I'm mostly excited for the revival of the wine bath meme. It's interesting because we went from the Spurs East as our run-on joke when we got Sean Marks, and now we're the Suns East. So I'm not really sure which one will truly be at the end of the day when the sun sets. But Brooklyn's going to be very interesting this season, and I'm very excited to see how well collaborative coaching works because I honestly think it's common. We just don't really put a label on it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and the Nets are the only team that are like getting, fried for that. Like, look at the Clippers bench. There's a former Nets head coach just sitting on there and helping out with head coaching. Chauncey Billups as well. The Sixers have got a pretty, vaunted core. You have Dave Yeager on that bench as well. So it's like there's just kind of an overflow of coaching talents right now, and what this makes for is just really talented benches. We'll see what it turns into. We'll see if that works out well. This could be the year of just incredible, offensive and defensive production, or it's a year of weird instability that's, kind of top down. We'll see.
Well, we do have a little bit of news. Not too much news, nothing Nets related, but a former Net. So Chris Haynes is reporting that Rondé Hollis-Jefferson has reached an agreement with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Oh, awesome.
So reuniting with D'Lo and Ed Davis. What are we thinking, guys?
Dude,
I think it's a great locker room presence.
Is this a D'Lo GM move? Is this a D'Lo GM move, or is this more of a kind of fills any holes? What are you thinking?
I think they're trying to placate to me. I think that's what's going on here. This is like me and the T-Wolves, we've been broken up for a while. They're putting pics up on Instagram. They're looking good right now. They've got all former Nets that I love from the 2018-2019 team. It's pretty hilarious. That team's super fun to me. I mean, they brought back Beasley. They have Anthony Edwards, who I think is the new guy where you're super split on him. You either love him and think his quirks are hilarious. I'm of that, mind. But there's also the other side that's kind of not sure what to expect. I don't know, man. That team is just fascinating to me.
It's nice. And then also the reuniting with Pablo Prigioni. So they're going for Nets West.
Yeah,
I love it.
We'll see if their bench can match up. We'll see if the bench can match up.
Oh yeah, the dancing will be amazing.
But let's move on to another player that the Nets signed in the beginning, Bruce Brown. So, what do we like about Brown, and do you just like the addition overall?
Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, he just the nice thing about him is that he brings a different skill set, and it's not just the defensive aspect of it, which is a big part of it, but it's just he's somebody that knows exactly what he is, and that's kind of a gap filler. He knows the areas that he can improve, but he's not overzealous about it. So when we were, I believe you were on the Zoom call with me, where he talked a little bit about areas of improvement for him, and he mentioned playmaking, and that's not him saying, yeah, I want to become a big time scorer, because that's not going to happen. I'm sorry, it's not. There's almost too much scoring going on in Brooklyn right now. He just knew that he has to be a guy that has to be a connector, a guy that's, of course, making the big plays on defense, which is something he's done his entire professional career and college career, but also just being somebody that's going to make sure everybody is working together cohesively. So I like him. I think he has a really good concept of what he's supposed to be on this Nets team. And he seemed generally like exhilarated about being on this team, which is cool. I mean, that's what you want.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Exactly.
And it's also nice to have someone who has a big game against the Nets on the Nets. So at least he'll have the confidence with the players.
Very true. Very true. Very true. Yeah, exactly. Just exactly what Matt said. Obviously, it's quite funny that 3-team trade was one of the largest in Nets history, and it didn't really involve a lot of major pieces, I guess you could say. Usually, you see a lot of 3-team, 4-team trades, whatever the case is. It has some substantience with it. It could either be a lot of like a good player in it, whatever the case is, but this was just a lot of moves, a lot of little players, and a lot of draft picks. But overall, hey, little fun fact: 12th best paid player on the Nets. He brings in that defensive mentality. He was talking about that the whole time on that Zoom call as well, like Matt was mentioning earlier. I'm high on him, and at the end of the day, listen, we had to give up Musa for him, and he's one of those guys that have kind of that little kind of a higher upside to him than what a Musa brought in to the Nets. So that's what I would have to say. But I like the addition of Brown. I'm excited to watch him next season.
And speaking of the trade, we also have Landry Shamet, who's joining the fold, who, for a young guy, he's had a good amount of playoff minutes and shots, which that is perfect for what we're building for. Unfortunately, Musa did not have the experience and nor the time to build in that role, except with Long Island. So I'm really glad he's going to get his shot because he does have the confidence. We just need it to fall. And so I'm really hoping best for the Pistons, especially because they have a large amount of centers. So he will get his minutes, I'm sure. So what do you guys think about Shamet coming through? And what did you think about that meal he was making during the news announcement of the, I believe it was steak, but I could be wrong.
Yes.
It was steak.
It was like, I believe it was carne asada with it. I think he said it was homemade salsa. I believe that was Christian.
Yeah.
He's been on your show, right? I'm correct about that?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. So this is a nice little crossover. Yeah, he asked that question. I was like, yeah, that's a good one. That's a
Christian question. That's a Christian question.
But yeah, no, I mean, the thing that I really like about him, well, I like assets that I feel like haven't necessarily been used at their full potential. So you watch the Clippers, and there's a lot of things wrong with that team. They don't communicate well on defense. It's like, it looks like pickup, basketball. That's like what we watched in the bubble. One of the weirdest parts of that wasn't necessarily, Kawhi and PG not really playing with one another. It wasn't really PG never playing off ball or Marcus Morris jacking up shots on his own. No, the weirdest thing about them was watching Landry Shamet like generate his own offense. He just dribbled so much. And even in that weird role, he showcased two things. A, he's got a better handle than I realized. And B, he can play make a little bit. And I think if he's in a role where he's sort of curling around screens, coming off the, if you're whatever, you're running him out in transition, kind of the way the Nets do with Joe Harris, that makes a lot of sense for Landry Shamet. And he's got a little bit of extra juice in the same way that Joe Harris can get to the basket. He's got a little bit of playmaking. He knows where the guys are around him. So I think that's a really interesting wrinkle for the Nets. It just makes them more devastating on offense to have multifaceted but still catch and shoot guys.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree with you. And the one thing, you were on the call as well, the one thing that really stuck out to me with Shamet was mostly his mentality to do whatever the team wants him to do. And obviously, you see that all across the NBA. A ton of players say when they go on new teams and stuff. But on top of that, when I asked him about his defensive play, he said, these guys will never have the question whether I'm going hard or not. So that mostly means he's going to put in the work on the defensive end. And like you said, he's a playmaker. He's more than just a shooter. I know a lot of people around the league just see him as a little shooter, whatever the case is. But he has that playmaking in him as well. And at the same time, listen, he's a young guy, and like Matt just said, he's one of those guys that haven't really had that full potential or even that full kind of ceiling. He hasn't hit that ceiling yet. And like Sean Marks said, he watched him in college or followed his trajectory throughout his college career, which mostly means he had eyes on him in the draft. And but overall, listen, I love the addition. I think it's a great addition, great piece. I really think on both ends of the floor, especially the offense, gives that more kind of fluidity to it. But I'm really excited to see what he does in Brooklyn. And then let's move on to Jeff Green. That I think that one was a little a player that caught some people by surprise, but once they connected the dots, it made a lot of sense. He's one of those guys. So played with Kevin Durant, Seattle, proven his worth over the course of his career. So I'll start with any one of you guys that want to take it. What do you think about Green, and how do you like this addition?
I like it. I think it indicated to me, and this might be, I mean, a lot of times when I see like moves and stuff like that, I tend to think about how it's going to work on the court, and sometimes that can be pretty misguided.
Mm-hmm.
When they made that signing, and yes, of course, it's friend of KD, which is a very big part of how this team is built. I also think they're going to run a lot of pick and roll. I just, that's my immediate thought. That's kind of what we saw from him last year, was that he's a guy that works on both ends of the pick and roll, either as a ball handler or as a screener. It's like really where the Rockets unlocked him. So maybe this is, hopeful optimism, but that's what I want to see from him more. Like, I want to see him involved in plays and like working with Kyrie and KD kind of really, I guess, in on ball situations. Defensively, I mean, he's passable now. Like, he's still a decent athlete, but those days I think are behind him. So he's passable, but I think the offensive punch is, I don't know, he just offers a little bit more than like your average veteran minimum player. And I think a lot of that is just because he's kind of had this weird third part of his career where there's a side of him that's finally getting unlocked. The playmaking out of the short roll, the ability to take on multiple roles on offense, and again, I mean, he's a guy with a lot of pedigree who came into this league as a lottery pick. He was expected to really be a creator in a lot of ways. He's finally getting to showcase that in these like limited, I guess pick and roll samples. So it's cool. I want to see more of it.
Mm-hmm. So completely agree with you. When I think of Jeff Green signing, I think of two things. I think of veteran presence and front court depth. Those are two things that really come to my mind. Obviously, when I started putting the pieces together, Nets really lost the veteran leadership and the veteran presence when Garrett Temple, they declined his option, right? So a couple days later, they did sign Green. And when you just think about Jeff Green, right, he's had, like I mentioned before, he has that work that's carried over the years. This is, I think, is his 16 past 8 years, but he's able to find that stability. He may go off the market for a little bit. Nace may not sign until February. I think that's when he signed with the Rockets. But like you said, I'm very interested, like exactly what Matt just said. I want to see him incorporated more than rather just have him being like a piece, like a kind of like a, not a bystander, but one of those guys, okay, you just pass it to, okay, take the shot, whatever the case is. I want to see him more and kind of in the system, some play calls, and really see what he could really bring to this team outside of just veteran leadership and that front court depth.
Well, you don't want him just sitting in the corner. Like, you want him to be your small ball five, which is really cool because if you have him as your small ball five and he's setting screens, you can invert that with him. Like, you can't have Jared Allen run the pick and roll as the ball handler. That's not going to work, or DeAndre Jordan or Nicholas Claxton just yet. So the nice part about Jeff Green is that you have those options on offense, is that he can take on multiple things and also survive as a five. Like, he did that decently well in Houston.
Yeah, I think his time with the Rockets truly helped. He was my pickup in FanDuel Daily Sports. Like, he always put up the numbers I needed when others would not. The switching between KD at the 4 and 5 during games will be extremely helpful. That versatility. He still has that athleticism to an extent that's, good for his time and career. I do think he'll be an upgrade to Wilson Chandler, and I do think we'll see more of an impact. And also that friend of Kevin will be perfect because, everyone's talking about chemistry, and to have someone so important from early on in Kevin's career, I think will be really undervalued. So hopefully, it continues to work out really well. So speaking of offense and that, so the Nets brought back not only Tyler Johnson, but Joe Harris on brand new deals. And I think Joe got what he deserved. I don't think he was overpaid. I don't think it screws over the versatility of our cap to what some fans and other teams may, speculate. So what do you guys feel about them coming back to Brooklyn?
Well, this is what I think, right? Getting to the I've seen it when the deal got announced for the 4 years, $72 million. I saw the overpaid and stuff, but this is how you view it, right? People that watch Joe Harris a lot with the Nets understand why he was paid that much, and people that didn't watch Joe Harris on the Nets see it as overpaid because they just know him as a shooter. That is, I'm just gonna put that out there. He was one of the highest paying Nets out there. He deserved his money. And the good thing about it is Joe, like Sean Mark said, Joe represents what a Brooklyn Net is, right? He's been there from the very beginning. He's one of those guys that really was a journeyman. He started out, I think, what was it, with Cleveland? He had some type of ankle surgery, worked his way up, and kind of just really built his career in Brooklyn, revived it, became one of the league's best shooters alone. I'll take a quote out of Nolan Jensen. He's more than just a shooter. People notice that, and like I said, non-Nets fans see him as just a shooter because they don't see him on a daily basis like we do, or we study him and stuff like that. But it was a move the Nets had to make. It was a priority. It was Sean Marks' number one priority. I know Joe Harris said it multiple times that he wanted to come back to Brooklyn like he did on his previous contract when he signed. And I like it. I don't have any complaints about it. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I just pulled this up. I mean, Gallinari, who is, I believe, 31, signed for 3 years, 20-ish, 20.3. We'll kind of even it out on that. I think Gallinari offers a little bit more in terms of self-creation, but Joe Harris shot 53% on wide open shots. He shot 44% in a down year on catch and shoot looks. Like, this guy does not miss. He does not miss. So you're in a situation where you can say, well, the Nets spent their cap. Okay, well, who's going to make more sense of anybody who's going to be a free agent in the next couple of years? And I like Spencer Dinwiddie a lot. I do. But Joe Harris even makes a little bit more sense next to Kyrie and KD as somebody who's going to be a supportive piece. You know, he makes more sense than Spencer. He makes more sense than Jared Allen. They had to do it. They had to bring him back, and he's going to add so much to their offense. They need guys like Joe Harris. And that's actually, again, we bring up Jeff Green. That's where a guy like that makes some sense. He's a guy that doesn't need the ball in his hands. He's going to fill those gaps. Same thing I said about Bruce Brown. A gap filler. That's what Joe Harris is. And that's the type of guys they need for this team.
Yeah, no, his off-ball movement is going to be a major key for the offense. His ability to be an amazing cutter. He's getting a little bit better with his flashy drive and kick-out passes. Hopefully he'll get a little less turnover ratio down there. But his hustle, I think, when people think of defense, they think of lockdown. But what Joe does is his hustle. He may not be the fastest guy on the court, but the way he's built, he's very compact. So when it comes to that half-court defense, he's the guy you want. And also, it wasn't too long ago where he had a strong percentile in finishing at the rim. And who was right next to him? LeBron. So, I mean, I'm not saying Joe Harris is LeBron, but Joey's going to get his buckets one way or another. So Joey Baggs is going to get paid. Well-deserved.
Completely agree. And then on to Tyler Johnson. This proved his worth in the bubble, right? He's one of these examples that Sean Marks always knows his guy, right? So you could date it back to when I think it was the Heat that matched the contract with him. He did very well in the bubble. I think 38% deep in the seeding games. I think it was 39 point. I think it was like close to 40% in the first round. And for him to get him back, I was surprised when it actually went through because I'm surprised the team didn't pick him up. But I like that signing as well. Great bench piece at the same time. Hey, if you want to make a big trade, he'll be included in it.
Yeah, I can't complain about like a third string point guard. It's like it's going to be very hard for me to complain about one by nature. I think he's totally qualified to be that. I think even as a backup, he'd be solid. I think the shooting numbers can be a little noisy, especially for a guy that's really playing for a contract and to stay in the league. I do kind of wonder about that, and his shooting kind of varies from year to year. But I do like he's gotten certain parts of his game that I just like. Like he's a hustler on defense. He doesn't do everything perfectly, but he really tries. He's a little bit smaller, so he's able to get around screens well, and he's a guy that's really able to get around the floor pretty easily. And then on offense, he's got a little bit of. He's not going to just, create a ton of offense and flash every crossover in the book. But if you run him off the line, like he's either going to go to the mid-range or he's really nice to draw in contact as well. So little things about him I like. And again, it's a third point guard. Like it's amazing I have this much to say about him.
That's what I'm saying. That's a big point too. Sorry to interrupt, Doug. But that's what it comes down to too. Like it's a third string point guard. You can't really argue too much of, we could have got someone better or we could have got this. It's a third string point guard at the end of the day. We've seen what he could do, and at the end of the day, like Matt said, he's got to perform well, and we're just going to see how he is. He's going to be one of those players to definitely keep an eye on this season.
Yeah, no, as Matt said, the mid-range game is clearly not dead with the Nets. It is not going to be die by three. Even I'd like to think with MDA, we're not going to revert back to three, all nothing but threes. His mid-range game is really helpful, even driving, like stopping and popping. So, like, once again, we'll bring back Jeff Green. The stop and pop action will be quite superior, I think. Hopefully he'll get utilized, and not shy away from contact. He has several missing and probably fake teeth to prove it. So I think he's got the grit that we need this upcoming season.
And then onto the player that really not a lot of people are talking about him. It's Reggie Perry. He was drafted by Brooklyn. Personally, I got to watch a lot of him because when I was a Naismith social media intern, what they do is they do a bunch of watch list candidates, and throughout the year it goes dimmers down and stuff. And he was one of our player of the weeks, so I got to highlight him throughout kind of his college career. I got to watch a little bit of Mississippi State. I think it was like maybe 10 games of it, so I got to see a little bit of him. But Matt, I want to get your idea first on Perry. What do you like? What's your opinions on Perry overall?
I don't have a huge opinion on him. I'm not a college guy, so a lot of my opinions on college players are secondhand. So anybody, it's not a huge specialty of mine. I do like that he has basketball lineage. That's always something you want. I believe his father played at Mississippi State. I believe. I might have even typed that out at 2 a.m. Half asleep. So I believe I typed that out. That feels familiar saying it out loud. But no, I'm curious to see what he is because there's room for him to play. Like
he's a big man. He's a big man.
We've gone this long without mentioning that, like, I don't, what is it? 2/3 of the roster are guards, and
Exactly.
There's room for him to play.
Completely agree. And on top of Perry, right? With the two-way adjustment rules, obviously you guys saw, I think previously it was 45 days completely. That's including practice and everything with the parent club. Now they kind of upgraded to 50 games. It's not 50 days. That's 50 games. So I think if I'm like Matt Riccardi with the Long Island SGM, if I'm Sean Marks, I'm thinking, listen, I think it won't hurt to give this guy a two-way contract. He's a big guy. He's very, I wouldn't say like necessarily he's super athletic, whatever the case is, or like a Dante Hall, whatever, like that type of level of athleticism. But he's that guy that has potential. He's built. He's massive. I forgot who said it about Reggie Perry, but someone said you don't find people walking on the street like that. You just don't. And at the end of the day, I'm excited. That's one of the players I'm really going to keep an eye on because it's going to be interesting to see how much the Nets do use him. Because obviously, like you said, the playing time is there. The roles are there. That this Brooklyn team has guards, like a lot of them, a lot, and that's like a lot. So at the end of the day, and I'm excited to see him and Claxton, how they maneuver those two. With Perry, his jump shot's there. It needs a little bit more of work in today's NBA, but hey, he's a second-round pick, and I think that's where the two-way contract comes in. I think he'll do great. I think Long Island, whoever the next head coach is going to be down there, will utilize him very well. Kind of similar ways they utilize Claxton, but spend more time down there if the two-way does happen. But he's definitely going to be a player I'm going to have a lot of eyes on.
Yeah, no, I think Chris is absolutely right. I think he'll be a Long Island Nets project. As of now, our roster is pretty set, but, changes are bound to happen, as they always do. But anyways, so were there any realistic free agents you expected the Nets to sign but didn't? And I know everyone wants to bring up Serge Ibaka, but unfortunately that was not realistic, although I tried. I pretty much convinced myself that it was for a long period of time, but even though KD ate snake, it was not enough. So what are you thinking, Matt?
I am of the so on the Ibaka thing, it seemed like it was going to happen like a couple days before it really did, and it was like that or LA, and that's kind of just what the indication was. A lot changed. So Jeremy Grant goes to Detroit. Denver panics. They grab JaMychal Green. JaMychal Green is now no longer a Clipper. Then they have, the Clippers have already lost Montrezl Harrell, which we'll see. I don't know if they want to bring him back. They panic. They bring in Serge Ibaka. All these dominoes fell, and I do kind of feel like the Nets offseason could be summarized by Jeremy Grant. Not only the Nuggets got screwed over by Jeremy Grant, but I actually think that there is some truth to the idea that Jeremy Grant screwed over the Nets as well. Just because of how all these dominoes fell. Free agency works like that sometimes. Other years it doesn't. Guys go where they want. There's no whatever. There's no worry about that. So I kind of the thing for me is the more I look at it, the more I think about that timeline, the more I think about when Serge Ibaka signed to the Clippers, the more I realize, God, there were a lot of really intriguing options, but I genuinely think the Nets were handcuffed by this Ibaka thing. So, Mo Harkless goes to the Heat. And I'm not saying Mo Harkless is going to be, he's a nice defender. I like Mo Harkless a lot. He's not an incredible offensive player, but at the very least, he'd make some sense on the Nets roster. He signs for what, $3.5 million in Miami?
Something like that.
Something really dirt cheap. And you're just, those are the type of guys that I think they missed out on. By the time they've, lost out on Ibaka, it's like, what's the market now? It's like Torrey Craig is the best wing defender. I did a 20-minute free agency preview. I didn't even mention Torrey Craig because I was like, I don't know. He's fine. He can't really shoot, and we've never seen him last more than one round of the playoffs. So I don't know. I mean, I think that their offseason could be best summarized in that. There's a lot of names that would make sense. But unfortunately, they kind of got handcuffed by this Ibaka thing. And that's just me reading the situation. That could be wrong. They could have been out on it and they were like, we're going to go all guards. And in that case, I mean, I guess we'll ask Sean Marks this week about that idea.
Yeah, that's what it's going to come down to.
But no, I mean, that's kind of how I feel like the dominoes fell over in this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I agree with that.
I think the other thing is the James Harden news, although we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I think being tied to that rumor of a superstar player wanting to play for you and it requires a lot of roster depth, you really have to play it safe when it comes to free agency. Like I think moves like Landry and Brown, don't really tip the scale on the Harden trade. Clearly it didn't, but maybe they would have made different moves by now if one, Ibaka, as you mentioned, or two, if they knew the whole James Harden deal. But like I said, we'll talk about it a little bit later on. But there were a lot of, small pieces that moved around, shifted, and perhaps you're right with the Nuggets, jumping, stealing from the Clippers, and the Lakers. I don't know if we'll call it a steal from the Clippers when it comes to Montrez, because it sounded like there were some chemistry issues in the bubble. So that's evident to that.
I agree with that. Because getting back to the Serge Ibaka thing, listen, when it came down, at that time where the Nets, it was on the radar and everything, the Nets did not have the money for it. Ibaka went to LA to fill the two needs that he was looking for, money and a chance at a championship. That's what it came down to. For me, I'm on the same page as Matt. With this free agency, there was not like a star name or anything like kind of highlighting like, oh, he's considering this, right? It was more like Matt said, a domino type of free agency. One player moves. Oh, this team panics, needs to fill that hole. Okay, let me grab this person, fill him in. That team, it's all like that. That's how this free agency kind of worked. Overall, am I going to say, hey, I expect the Nets to go all guard heavy this free agency? No, I'm not. I wouldn't have said that in the very beginning. But at the end of the day, like Doug said too, you have James Harden kind of tied into that. But the thing is, we're going to dive into a little bit of James Harden. But once I really heard Sean Marks talk about it that one time, I think it was 2 weeks ago, about James Harden, kind of stressing that patience. That's when I really started to figure out, I was like, okay, the rumors are a little hyped up, but at the same time, like Sean Marks knows like how to play this thing out.
Yeah, definitely. So looking at the big picture with the roster the Nets have, what are your expectations and where do you think the Nets end up? As we mentioned before we started recording, they're not going to have a chance to tie or surpass the Warriors' wonderful record. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll tie the Bulls, but I don't think that's happening either.
I don't think it's happening. I don't think that's happening. Because I guess I'll go first on this one. I think the Nets, I think that all said and done, listen, so many things could happen with this team. Like that's the thing. Like with my luck, I'm gonna say, hey, they're this seed, and then they just completely blow those expectations, and they end up at the one. That's it. You never know what could happen, but with the roster that they're at right now, maybe 3-4 seed. I don't see them in the top two. I just don't see it quite yet. I think that with Kevin Durant, people got to realize too that this guy's coming back on the court. Let him use the preseason way to get in there, but don't expect this guy to go all out and just start being that vintage KD right away. Same with Kyrie Irving. They got to all mesh together. A lot of new players on this team too. But I think with the coaching staff, with Vaughn, Nash, I think that's going to play a huge role in this. I think that coaching staff, I feel like, is really not necessarily under pressure, but I'm very high that they're going to fulfill those expectations. But do I think a championship this year? My gut is telling me no. I do not think that they're going to win a championship this year, looking at the roster and kind of the moves around the league, especially with the Lakers side of things. But in the Eastern Conference, hey, I have them as a kind of Eastern Conference finalist at that point. I'm safe with saying that. Depending on how everything plays out during the season, a lot could happen. Yeah, I could see them easily making the finals, but I just don't see them bringing home a championship this season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's a championship roster nor season. I just, it's a really weird, imbalanced roster. And I think in the regular season, you can get away with, and actually it might honestly help you to have as many creators as they do. Like we saw, think about the bubble, like the first, even through the first round, it was like, I'm looking at these teams that are playing well and I'm like, my goodness, like it really seems like it helps if you have as many shot creators as possible. And then as you get further and further in, and that's kind of happens in the playoffs, like teams really start just gripping down and digging in defensively. And that's the part where I'm like, I just don't know what that looks like for this Nets team. I don't know who's going to be that glue guy, who's going to be the filler, the gap filler player. I feel like I've said that like 19 times in this podcast, but I do think it's a big thing for them. If you had to make me do a prediction, I would say I do think they could be an Eastern finalist. Sorry, did I lose you guys?
Only video,
back?
not audio.
There we go. Back. He's back.
There we are. All right. Sorry, you guys. That's my fault.
It's fine.
We're all good.
So I do think they could be a Eastern Conference finalist. I could see them falling a little bit short. The thing about the Eastern Conference is that I think there's 4 teams in the regular season that are 3 really. I don't like the Celtics as much as other people. The Heat, obviously. The Bucks because of what they can offer defensively. I like the Sixers a lot too. I think their roster just makes a lot more sense. They kind of have a roster that it reminds me a lot of before they went for Jimmy Butler and all those type of guys. They'll be in the mix as well. I'll even throw a record down. I think the Nets could go 46-26, which I believe is like a 51-52 win pace. I think they're probably that class of team.
Okay, I agree with that. I was thinking of our record when I was giving that response. I'm thinking high 30s, low 40s, anywhere from, if I had to give a range, 38 to 46. I'm going to say somewhere in that range. Obviously, that's a very big range. I get it. But like I said, I just don't see this year being a championship year. That's mostly what it's going to come down to. What about you, Doug? What are you thinking?
I concur. I say, I don't see us as a 2 seed. 1, because we don't have as many games to get that chemistry going. 2, we don't know how they'll manage health of our players. KD coming back from the Achilles, even though he's had one of the longest rest periods ever. And Kyrie, he's always susceptible to injury. So I'm very curious. But hopefully, everyone stays healthy with the shorter season. I do think what matters more is how we perform in the playoffs, but I don't see us this year at the moment. Maybe it's the free agency mirage, but I don't see us getting a chip this season. I do think the conference finals is, feasible. I do think also second round, exit is feasible. But I do think, I want to say this confidently, that whoever we play in the first round, we're going to win. How many games, I don't know, but we're going to win. But a lot of it rests on the health of our players more than anything, regardless of the rest of the roster. We could have a terrible regular season record, even with the, 72 games versus 82. But what it comes down to the end of the day is the playoffs. I mean, yeah, the Clippers tried that with a lot of resting of PG and the Claw and, backfired, whether or not you can attribute that to the COVID postponement of the league. But, I think what it all boils down to is how the coaching works out, how the players work out, and the health. Because the Nets always have an issue with health. I mean, I've noticed that in the Brooklyn era, at least 1 or 2 key guys, either it's down the stretch or early in the season, someone gets hurt around the same time. So that is my biggest concern. Hopefully it's just minor injuries. They've already survived, for lack of better phrasing, their COVID phase of the roster from last season. But I think somewhere in the 40s is fair, given, cutting back 10 games for the full season. I really don't know what to expect. I mean, it's kind of crazy that we're, a few weeks away from preseason, then we have the regular season starting up just a few days before Christmas, and it's crazy. It's also even more crazy to think that there's once again playoffs in July. Like,
Yeah.
Jared Dudley and I have a lot to celebrate for our birthday.
Yeah.
Like, but I don't know what to expect. It's a weird schedule. It's going to be weird with less games. It's going to be weird to have a newcomer in the division, if I remember correctly. There's so many. And the potential of going to an actual game, do you go or not? And will the inclusion of potentially having fans change that shooter's mentality? Because one of the things when we talk about Joe is, it's become more of a shooter's league. So we'll see how big man gets paid towards summer, but I don't know.
Plus, you got to tie in COVID. That's a main thing too. You got that's another big thing. You see how in the NFL, you see it with stars. Stars unfortunately get the virus. They have to sit out that period, the quarantine and everything. And think about it, right? If on this Nets team or any team across the league, one star player gets it, that's 14 days. You know how many games are in 14 days? It could range from 3, 5, whatever the schedule kind of presents, right? Or even a road trip. And you gotta always balance that in there, unfortunately. But like I said, there's so many lingering questions going on, and it's just going to be one of those seasons. Very weird to watch, but at the same time, hey, basketball's everyone enjoy it. So, let's ask the question that everyone kind of wants to hear, right? So, the bonus question. So, do you think the Rockets will trade for James Harden? If so, why?
Just to
Matt,
clean that up.
Take it away, Matt.
Not to trade for, but to trade away.
I think it happens this year. I just don't know if I think the Nets window was in that first week because I don't see the Nets trade package improving, right? So the centerpiece to that deal is Karis LeVert. Karis LeVert's coming off a really nice bubble run, like really, really nice. You have Zach Lowe on his podcast, just singing beautiful melodies about Karis LeVert.
Yeah.
If they don't get this done by training camp, Karis LeVert's going to be the third banana. Maybe he thrives in that role. I don't know. But regardless, you're not seeing him with a usage north of 30 and the ball running through him every single possession and him showing off all the smaller details of his game. I think that we've become kind of privy to, but people that are a little bit more, I hate the word casual, but people that don't really watch the Nets as much don't necessarily see. So his ability to find shooters when he's on the go in both the corners. I think all those things that we saw, and I'm sure other teams have as well, you're going to see a little bit less, right? Like the way they're going to make this work is he is going to have to be off ball. And some of that means maybe he cuts a little bit more. Maybe he does other things, but those aren't necessarily like star qualities. They just aren't. So yeah, I worry a little bit. I'm in the camp, like if they don't get this done now, it's so easy to beat what they're putting forth, the Nets. I mean, that let's say the Sixers start out slow and it's like, well, you know what? We did what we could. We brought in, Seth Curry. We tried to put as many shooters in place. We brought in Danny Green. We tried, and this didn't work out the way we wanted it to. It's clear these guys don't fit together with Embiid and Simmons. We're just going to make this trade. The Rockets are in a great place, by the way, because that's like the perfect roster for somebody like Ben Simmons, who, he's a great fit next to Wood, but he's also surrounded by shooters. You put James Harden there, that's another like really nice 1-2 punch, and talent wins out in this league, and they're in the mix. Like they're in the same class, if not a little bit better than what Brooklyn's putting forth, which I think is probably the best 1-2 punch in their conference. So yeah, I don't know. I really think if this was going to get done, it could have happened 2 weeks ago, and now, all it takes is one team to get a little bit desperate. But the Warriors could do that even. Like it's just it's just too easy to beat up what the Nets are putting forth.
Exactly. It's just piggyback off that. The thing that really, like I mentioned earlier, when Sean Marks was speaking in the first Zoom that me and Matt were both on with the fellow Nets media as well, the one thing that really stuck out to me, Matt, I think it'll jog your memory as well, is when he said, I don't plan on trading 5 or 6 guys.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, okay, he stressed patience. Obviously, you didn't mention James. We didn't have to mention James Harden. He knew what player we were talking about. And trading 5 or 6 guys, stressing patience, like you said, with the window of opportunity to make that deal, I think it. And with training camp and everything going on, it's a coin flip. Do they do it? I wouldn't be surprised if. I don't see James Harden as that type of player either that holds out. He's not that type of guy either. So I wouldn't. At the same time, listen, the Rocket, they don't have to trade him, but at the same time, Harden's with all the reports going on, reports have been X, Y, and then you got Z in the back, right? There's many sides to this report. You see them all the time, right? So my gut's telling me I don't see it happening, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does. But if it does happen, they got to make it soon. I don't think. And like Matt said, you said with the same with trade packages, right? Philadelphia has trade packages. There's so many other teams that have a little bit more spice to offer than the Nets. And the other thing that Showmark said too, he doesn't want to mortgage the future. In that same call, he didn't say, "Oh, I don't want to send first round picks. I don't want to do what we did with the Billy King era, or whatever the case is." And with the patience, him obviously he's a GM. He's going to complement the roster as it is. He's not going to say, "Hey, we need help. Hey, we're going to totally reshape the roster. We like our group of guys." He's always been that type of mentality, right? But as it is now, if I had to put the puzzle together, I don't see it happening. But if they are going to make it happen, they have to do it pretty soon.
Yeah, I think the window is pretty much closed at this point, specifically for the Nets. The Rockets, he has 2 more years left in his contract. It's a very similar situation to Kyrie when he was traded to the Celtics, which was not a team on his list. So for all we know, there could be a sleeper team out there that's, by trade deadline, which is I do think he gets traded this season, but at this point, I don't see it happening until the deadline. Whether or not it's the Nets, I really can't say because we don't know how teams will play because there's less games. Some teams make those maybe within the first 30 or so games, and that's, not a lot given the length of this year's league. So I do think it happens. If it's the Nets, I don't know. You don't always get what you want, no matter how many millions you're making. But you can cry sometimes.
Yeah, then on top of that too, just piggyback it off too. If James Harden were to get traded, you bet there's gonna be it's gonna be a 3-team trade, if not more teams. All right, I don't see a James Harden deal making with just 2 teams straight. I don't think it's gonna happen. I think they're gonna have to incorporate a 3rd team, and I'm just gonna leave it at that, honestly.
Yeah, it will most likely be a team within the playoffs, but I'm curious how petty the Rockets owner will be in the end. So that's another thing to look out for.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, Matt? Any other little?
No, I think it's an interesting exercise for the Nets. I'm of the mind I would do it. I wouldn't worry about the picks, but if that's how Marks wants to handle this, then that's they have a different timeline plan. So that's my only real thought on the entire matter. Is I think of in terms of a team building perspective, I would go all in when you have it. Maybe there's something else. Maybe he's look, you bring in 3 guys. Look, we've done a lot about how it might fit, about how great they might be. There's the downside. There's the downside that, 2 of these guys click and one of the other guy feels left out or whatever. The touches don't make sense. They don't really have the guy who,
exactly.
Yeah, it's a mess. So there might be a part of him that's I know what the downside looks like in this scenario and I can't stop thinking about it. And the idea of giving up picks for that downside is just not worth it to me. Because, by the way, who's losing his job if that doesn't work out? He's the first one to go. Yeah. He's going to be the very first one. So you got to look out for yourself a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Well, I think we're just going to leave it off at that. I think we covered a lot, and, more is going to develop as time goes on, but time's ticking. So, but Matt, really appreciate you taking time every Monday night to join Doug and I. Hope you're catching some football or anything. Just enjoy the Monday night.
Yeah, no, I'm being a loser and looking at 2017 Cavaliers footage. So I'm living it up over here.
Oh, that's what I would do. Just hop on some YouTube, watch some old footage, whatever the case is. But Matt, our viewers already know you, our listeners already know you. But plug your social media. Where can they find you? Where's your work at? Give them the whole shebang.
I'll give the whole shebang. I'll give a good one, a good shebang. So you can find me on Twitter at MattBrooksNBA. Two main things to look out for. So I write for NetsDaily. I think most people know that by now. Well, it seems like me and Chris will be working on stuff this week.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to be busy. So we got a lot of stuff coming out this week. Maybe some stuff we're working on together. I have my show Basketball and More, which you guys mentioned at the beginning. That is, of course, brought to you by Sportscaster. It's pretty simple. I bring on reporters from across the globe. I talk about pretty much every single team in the league. It's been a fun project. It's been a fun thing that I've started in 2020. And then the last thing I want to plug is that I have a video coming out this week. And that's the reason why I'm watching 2017 Cavaliers footage. It's on the potential propensity of the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant pick and roll. So I went through a lot of different variations of the pick and roll, ways that the Nets can implement them, ways that Steve Nash can flaunt those two in that setting. I'm stoked. I'm very close to being done. I'm getting it done sooner than I thought. So that'll be out, I don't know, Wednesday through Friday, in that range. So it's Monday the 30th right now. So it'll be out soon.
Perfect. Well, this will be out Wednesday. So guys, let me tell you, Matt works hard. I love the kid. He does a lot of great work. I highly recommend you look into it. So, yeah. Thank you again, my man.
Really appreciate you coming on. We look forward to more of your content. Really glad to see you and Chris working together more this upcoming season. But time will tell how awesome you guys will be. So get ready on that pick and roll action.
Yes, sir.
As long as Chris doesn't have any leg injuries, you guys.
Listen, man, I'm made out of titanium and glass from the waist down. All right, I got a lot of. I've been banged up through my times.
But anyways, Chris, close remarks, and we'll say good night.
Yes, sir. So, guys, remember to send over any suggestions, questions, comments, thoughts, literally anything of our content by sending an email to wingspanpodcast@gmail.com. Do not forget to follow us on our social media accounts. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your preferred listening service. We're on almost every listening service. Google Wingspan Podcast will be there. As for next time, stay classy, take care, wear a mask, and be yourself.